not drank half a pot of coffee, Clayton, I'm never going to be more ready.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Beth.
I'm Nina.
Kyle Perkins.
I'm Lanina.
KD.
Why do you... What?
What?
It was
What?
so sad.
Are you in pain?
All the
Do you
time.
need a doctor?
Doctor, give me the news.
I got a wild case.
Loving
You.
Alright, guys. Kyle and I are leaving.
We're eloping.
So have fun.
So before we actually start talking about anything of consequence, I just want to remind our listeners that you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. We are, you can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And I personally am on Discord as DM Scorpio number 0660, and I have created a channel for Alien Familiar Media. Does it seem like to anyone else my accent's coming through more today for some reason? Because I feel like my accent's coming through more than
Man,
normal.
I don't know what the fuck y'all there talking about, man. I'll
Are we
tell you when I
starting-
get on
hey, is
down
this-
the rail high. I'm fucking... No, you sound
Is
normal.
this the
Okay.
You
podcast
sound
where we
normal.
just do our normal accents without, like, hiding them any bit?
Oh, is it finally time for that?
No. Oh.
Never
mind.
I'll go back to hiding who I am.
Fine.
I literally didn't notice anything.
Okay.
I did not.
I think you're
don't know.
speaking slower, and that might be why you're more noticing it.
I thought you sounded like you had a pep in your step, maybe. Like, are you in a good mood, Clayton?
Pep in your
I don't know.
Oh.
So our topic for today is going to be sandbox games and emergent stories. What are they? How can you GM them? How can you be a good player in them? And I want to start off by just kind of defining what sandbox games are.
Tonka trucks. 2x6s. Sand.
Yes, those are things.
Sandbox games.
As a very small child, yes, those are things you do play in a sandbox with sandbox.
Does Tonka still exist?
Yeah.
Cool.
Of course.
I was always told to stay out of sandboxes.
Who told you that? Cats.
Yeah.
That's why we never had a sandbox when I was growing up, because cats would shit in it.
Okay, we were just gross kids, right? We sandbox.
Did anybody else have one of those sandboxes that was shaped like a turtle and the turtle shell was the lid of the sandbox?
I raised my hand.
Fucking shit, I forgot about those.
I wasn't allowed in public sandboxes.
Remember the 90s?
Our sandboxes, they were fun for a while, but then in the summer, scorpions would be there.
Oh!
Jesus!
Well,
Wait,
that's
did you guys just,
Wow.
like, scoop up some of the sand that's, like, inside your house, right? 'Cause you
Okay,
live in
fuck
Texas,
off!
and then you, like,
I live in
dump them-
central Texas. We've got trees. West Texas is actually what you're thinking
Oh,
of.
okay. Clayton, what are sandbox games?
Sandbox games are ones in which the players have all of the power for determining what happens.
terrifying.
The players have the closest thing to total autonomy that can be represented in role-playing games. We have a spectrum where railroad games are at one extreme, where the game master has the story, you are going to play that story, the story is going to play out in the way that the game master wants it, and your players are just along for the ride. That is one extreme.
I've never heard them called railroad games. I literally thought you were talking about like Euro Rail Simulator, where you're just like, oh boy, time to go, and the Copenhagen to fucking London is in. Ugh.
This is
Copenhagen
the
to
second
London.
time
That's a
you
bit long train ride, Kyle.
Long and circuitous.
Takes the channel.
That's the second time that you made a joke about me, like, oh, I thought you literally meant this. So I think we've reached the
We
quota.
reached the cap.
I think a lot of things, and I'm not going to hold myself back just because y'all are a bunch of fucking haters.
Was this
Yeah.
because you were listening to the last podcast? Are you channeling?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Mm.
Henry Zabrowski is out there somewhere, and if he listens to this podcast, then you, well, help. I literally have never heard them called railroad games. Like, I've heard, like, on rails, but
That's
a
where
railroad
that comes
game.
from.
That's where it
Yep.
comes from, yeah.
Fascinating.
So we got railroad games at one extreme, and then on the other are these sandbox games where the game master has little to no control over what's happening in the story. And along that continuum, we have emergent stories, and how much emergent story is in that, I feel, is where determines where on that continuum you have. If you have emergent stories are tales that do not come from the game master, but from the interactions of the players, either with each other or with the environment. to determine where on this spectrum between railroading and sandbox games you fall entirely depends on how much autonomy the game master allows the players to have in the game.
So what's amazing is that I wrote a thesis paper on this topic.
Really?
Yep. My undergraduate thesis. Storytelling in open world video games. Not pen and paper. It wasn't good. You can look it up. Go out there, look up Kyle Perkins, find my thesis, Ohio University. It's bad. It's bad. 50 pages. Nonsense. 48? I forget now. But I can launch into some ideas from that. Maybe I'll save them for further down the road, you know.
Well, were you talking specifically about video games?
I was, but concepts apply. It was really like in designing an open world game that can still tell a story. Mm-hmm. That was the gist of it. Like how to do that, my thoughts on doing that, a little bit of history of open world video games. But the concepts, the core concept was how to design a story and like setting, but still have it be a sandbox environment. And so some of it doesn't work because it was for video games, where you have like, you know, limitations on assets and fucking, you know, takes years to make some of these games. Probably takes someone years to make their campaign, you know. We talked about that guy in many episodes ago who just would have a huge, thick book of like ideas and never actually played the campaign. It was an episode. It was back there.
Well, Ed Greenwood, the designer of Forgotten Realms, whenever he first pitched the idea of the Forgotten Realms to TSR, they really liked the idea, so they wanted all of his material for the Forgotten Realms. Several crates later, they told him to stop sending stuff.
Holy shit. Wow.
That's just
that
like
would have been
hypergraphy at a certain point.
It would have been back in the like dot matrix printer days,
yes,
right?
This would have been like early 80s.
God, think about the sound of just crates of just
This was not fax. This was
printing.
via mail, so imagine how much that cost.
Good God.
Well, I sure think that that's a good transition back into sandbox games.
Beth, you did a little bit of research, and you actually came up with a much better angle to approach this topic than what I had.
Okay, I've got a couple of things, couple of kind of questions that I came across while I was reading about this. Warren Spector, who's the designer of the game Deus Ex, has argued that emergent narrative lacks the emotional impact of linear storytelling.
Warren Spector's a fool!
And I wonder what people thought about that.
I would say, and you can quote me on this, Warren Spector is a hack.
Okay, Warren Spector is a really cool guy, and his games are really good.
Warren Spector is a hack.
Who is this man?
The designer of the Deus Ex games.
Yeah. And when is that?
Deus Ex, it was an Ion Storm game, late 90s, I believe. Cyberpunk. You play J.C. Denton, a man who works as an agent for the United Nations, and he uncovers a web of New World Order conspiracies. And there are set pieces and places to go, and there is an overall story, and there are lots of cool things you can do. For example, your brother, spoiler alert, tells you to leave. He's also an agent for the UN. He tells you to leave because the UN fucking goon squad is coming because you've discovered the New World Order fucking Majestic 12 secrets. And your brother tells you to run. And he's like, go. And the game is like, move to the window, crouch to jump through it or some shit. And literally you can just choose not to. You can stay. And you can help him fight off the goons and save your brother.
Okay.
Cool.
Y'all's reaction now makes sense.
It's a great game, good game, really good game. But Warren Spector's wrong. Warren Spector's wrong. Being able to craft your own story as a player and feel like you are in charge. What was the exact quote? He said that it ruins engagement or something?
That it lacks the emotional impact of linear storytelling.
Right. There's nothing more emotionally impactful than making your own way. You can go your own way, just don't go away.
I can understand where he is coming from, specifically talking about video games, because we are not to the point where a video game's artificial intelligence can create an emotional, impactful story on its own.
I don't know about that. I think about Journey, the PS3 game, which was simplistic in design, but
You are bringing up something that I was going to put as a big caveat, and it's multiplayer.
Oh, that's fair. Oh, you mean like single-player
Right.
eminent storytelling. Okay.
The instant you bring in another person, things become infinitely more unpredictable, especially when you're matched up with random other people.
Yeah.
The
and you
moment
can't
you bring in
communicate.
other people, you bring in emergent story.
Okay. All right.
Intriguing.
Which is perhaps what makes pen and paper RPGs the best and most pure example of emergent stories.
Provided the game master is going to allow it to happen.
I think that's a really good point to bring up regarding that critical difference between video game RPGs and pen and paper RPGs. Most of my thesis,
And we're back.
most of
Alright.
it centers around the idea that that one should create nodes which are, for intents and purposes, they are immortally unchanging points in a story, which, despite any divergent nature of gameplay, would lead the players to a critical, almost choke point to bring them and center them back into the story which you are trying to craft, for the very simple reason that video games have limitations. The Blu-ray disc, it really changed the game. 60 gigabytes, I believe, of data. That's a lot to put on there, but even still, the games we're making today, they're just too big. And yet we have not reached that point where artificial intelligence can indeed craft the story. Now, pen and paper games, you are only limited by the imaginations in the room.
And the number of accents, apparently.
Yeah, so where did everybody else
And
zone
you're-
out?
Thank you for
Can you
attending
notes?
my TED Talk. I will be outside eating the cocktail wieners which you have provided. The barbecue sauce is simply scrumptious. Thank you. Thank
I
you
was
very
back on the Warrens. Like as soon as Kyle
I
started
got some
talking,
Blu-ray,
I started thinking
actually.
about like why I thought Warren Spector was a hack because I had Epic Mickey.
That was just his George Lucas phase where he got kids and he decided to make a kids game. He was done with all the true stories about conspiracies and dark paths, and he wanted to make a kids game because he got older. He had kids. George
Yeah, but it
Lucas-
was still this like promised visionary project that didn't deliver at all, and was like he was just jerking himself off the whole time about how great like Disney was. It was the beginning of Disney hegemony in the video game
Oh
industry.
no,
We need to
that
come back.
began long ago.
Anyway, I had to cut that in there because I realized all I was just screaming was Warren Spector's a hack. I didn't say why I thought he was a hack, and so Kyle's there like, he's not a hack.
I forgot about Epic Mickey actually.
Ultima's cool.
I believe, but
but-
Thief. No, Ultima was Richard Garriott.
Oh, okay.
I
thought he worked on,
another
like, a
favorite
couple
designer
of
of
them.
mine. Fucking
He did do Thief though.
yeah, Thief.
Oh, Wing Commander.
Deus Ex, Wing Commander, I believe. Okay. Anyway,
He's a hack though. Okay. Anyway.
I really am. I think that this is cool shit. This is a topic I've been looking forward to for a long time, Clayton. I think it's really cool. I think that is, and I wish I would have written about this in the piece of shit that I wrote. Like, RPGs around a table, it's fucking infinite what people can come up with. We gotta talk about how to design that and how to play in that. But I hope that you, dear listener, are as excited as I am right now. I'm sweating.
That's from excitement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you've said a little bit about why you're excited. But, like, if you could have, and you've talked about your thesis, but, like, what would you have put in there concerning pen and paper games? Like, how would you have connected video game and pen and paper ideas when it comes to, like, eminent storytelling and, or
Emergent.
emergent storytelling?
Imminent storytelling is a really good idea.
It's like
Oh god, here it comes!
You're just, like, watching it like, oh god, any second now. Storytelling, it's coming.
we need to make like a series of road hazard signs that the DM can hold up, like, deer crossing, falling rocks. It's like imminent storytelling.
Well, it all started upon my father's death 6 years ago. Alright, answer the question. Fucker.
What was your question?
I feel like
How would I
we're-
have linked them?
How would you have linked them?
We're running around the place.
Well,
No, we're not. We're tying this back in. It's about pen and papers, but also, I mean, this sandbox games and emergent storytelling, not imminent storytelling.
Imminent storytelling.
Thanks. They're linked though, and so I think you're in a unique perspective. You have a unique perspective, but you're also in a unique position to elaborate on that because you wrote 50 pages.
well, it would have been this, that pen and paper games don't have that core limitation of video games. The whole point about the thesis was this stupid, maybe it's good, I doubt it, idea that you can create a branching tree. And, this would have been like right around the time Mass Effect 1 was out is when I was writing this. I played Mass Effect for some research. the best way I thought to do a story in a video game where you have limited resources, you have to develop all the assets, that takes time and money, was to have a lot of like illusion of choice, that the player feels like they're making decisions that matter, and you make it seem that way, but it actually, you know, like behind the scenes, you're like running just like a fuel efficient fucking 4-cylinder, as opposed to like a rip-roaring V12 the player thinks they're driving around in. If that makes sense. I just got a motorcycle. Anyway, and the illusion of choice stuff comes in with these like bottleneck points that kind of bring things back together, and all of the things and decisions the player made in like the first act, say, of the video game. Out of all of those things, you take choices that matter, the system crunches the numbers, and basically like spits out, okay, the player did this, that, and that in the first act. Those things together means that they are on path number 2 for Act 2. Or like, it's 3 acts, we'll say. And each act, like Act 1, you'd make a lot of decisions, and then you take their decisions and you, use like an algorithm or, you know, just some like fucking flags and decision trees to realize, okay, yeah, the player is on path B. Path B in Act 2, and there's like path A through D. And then they do some shit in Act 2, they make some changes, they do some things with their story, and now they're in the end game for Act 3, and there's like, you know, A, B, C, D, and E for end game options, and based on their Act 1 and Act 2 decisions, they've got this and that, and now they're on this tree in Act 3. Like, they're here. And it's a lot of just like, you know, fucking, flowcharts. It's fucking flowchart. And you don't need to do that with your, pen and paper RPG, but I think it might still be a viable strategy. Because although you don't have to make, assets, you don't have to make 3D models, you don't have to make textures, you don't have to make music, you don't have to fucking program your pen and paper RPG. It's so much easier. You do still have to spend time writing it all down and not going mad by having these crates that you're sending in, about fucking Forgotten Realms to, you know, the developers, and they're like, stop. You might be able to take some of that fucking, like, ravings of a madman there and use that to help economize your design process.
I think you have to watch that illusion of choice stuff, because people pick up on that. Like, I was picking up on that playing Final Fantasy games in the single digits, because, I mean, it's obvious whenever, I mean, the biggest example people always give is Fable. People are like, oh my god, you know, this dynamic world and all the decisions you make, like, decide things, and all it really decides in the end is what you look like. Do you look like a good guy or do you look like a bad guy? And people, even without it being that obvious that your choices really don't matter, people pick up on that kind of stuff.
I think it's a sliding scale. You go too far down the road, like, what's that dude's name? Peter Molyneux.
Yeah, we want to talk about a real hack.
Like, you're like, I have created the most choice diverse game you'll ever put your fucking thumbs on.
That was actually a really legit Peter Molyneux.
Thank you.
Impersonation.
And then in the end, literally, you're right, it just decides, do you look like a good guy or an evil guy? And then in the end, also, from what I remember, all the bad shit you do at the very end, just like with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, if you repent, if you have like, you can, I'm being serious, you have like a change of heart in the game, and all the evil shit you do doesn't matter, you still save the realm and become a good guy. Like, all the choices, you're just like, okay, yeah, you can wipe that shit away.
Yeah. It's
fucking dumb! And that's a perfect example of too far down that rabbit hole. Like, and I totally agree with you. Your players pick up on that, they're gonna feel cheated, you're gonna lose your fan base. You don't want to.
Another problem with the illusion of choice is, I'm going to use Fable as an example of this because it is in fact the worst example, the most poignant example of this. In the first Fable game, you come to a point where you're in an arena and you're fighting this bad guy. At the end of this fight, you have the option of killing them or sparing their life. Whichever one you choose, you never see that character again in the game. So, the character is effectively removed from the game whether or not you kill them. So there is no consequence to your decision.
Like, he doesn't come back to save you or give you an item or anything?
No.
Wow.
Never heard from again if you
just
spare
gone.
them.
Do you realize how easy it would have been to just literally put him at the end? You already have the character model. You already had the animation. like, take the animation where he's swinging a sword at you, remove the sword and reverse it, and now it looks like he's going, arm up in the air instead of down, hacking with the sword. He's just like, "Yay!" And then he's at the end just like, "Hey!" Like, that's all you had to do, and the player would have been like, there's that fucking chump I saved. That's awful. That's bad.
And that's where role-playing games have the strength of not using that illusion of choice, having actual choice, because if you decide to let that NPC survive or let them live, they can become a recurring character if the players want it. It can be somebody that they go and visit and they talk to and they check up on to make sure that they are redeemed. And down the line, since they were a badass villain, they can be a badass ally after they've been redeemed. Those types of decisions that absolutely make a difference in the world and affect the story ongoing is part of the emergent story, because, like, you're gonna have dissension within the party if you've got multiple players of whether or not that person is you should kill that person or not. The vast majority of groups are going to have that debate, regardless of if everybody was a lawful good paladin, there would still be debate as to whether or not that villain was worthy of the chant of being redeemed, or whether they were so evil at heart that they just had to be killed at that point.
If you go to the trouble of making something in an emergent game that your players like or latch onto or talk about or in any way show interest in, keep it around.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't, overuse it and, make it boring and played out like Pharrell's Happy.
Let the players go to that person.
Yeah.
If the players like something, they will seek it out. If you have an NPC that you like and you make sure that they keep popping up, that is a guaranteed way to make those players resent that character.
I feel like with pen and paper RPGs, it's easier because, as you said before, you've sometimes used what characters are, like, deciding on and talking back and forth as, like, a change in the story, which means that even without them knowing, it is becoming emergent and they are shaping their, like, entire gameplay. But with video games, or in the idea of illusion of choice, it's almost like an illusion of emergence. It feels like, in some sort of way.
The illusion of emergence. It's an interesting concept. Like,
That's been rolling around in my head for like the past 10 minutes or so, and I'm just like, you gotta say it.
do you think that could result, or that could happen from over-planning? Like, in an emergent game or a sandbox game, you plan so much that everything is,
Every option that you can take is an option that you can take, but you don't actually change that option. Like, you know how in emergent gameplay you can, like, create new paths, but in, like, choice games, you can only take your path. Like it's A or B, open A or open B, and, like, either choice you have has, like, a further path to it. And more often than not, mostly in, like, pre-planned out games, they all connect out into the center somewhere. Even in, I know, in my brief GMing experience, I'm just like, they have to get to this point no matter what they do. So in the end, it's not a super emergent gameplay because you have, like, plot points that you have to meet. And for the players to shape their journey, I feel like it has to be very them deciding on where to go next and using their choices as help to build their further journey.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, that's difficult and time-consuming, but I don't know.
Well, I just want to point out that what you are describing is definitely on the sandbox side of the spectrum that I was talking about. You are allowing the player characters to basically define their own path to this thing that is going to happen. That is definitely on the sandbox side, the emergent story side, where you are promoting that sort of growth. And for somebody who is brand new to game mastering, that is a very promising start to you really being able to allow your players to do things that you didn't expect later on down the line. Like, a lot of going into and creating a sandbox game, the game master has to have experience in doing it. The game master is not going to do it right the first time that they do it. Experience is one of those things that you only get after you needed it.
Uh-huh.
It's a lot like writing or creating anything, painting. Like, if you're trying to write a story or paint a painting or create a song, something like that, create a structure, build something based on Japanese architecture, and you've never been to Japan, and you've never studied it, and you've never seen any photos of it. Like, you've heard a few people be like, man, I sure do like those gates. And you're like, that inspires me. You're like, you could try, it's not going to work. You're going to make something, it's not going to be accurate, it's not going to be what you wanted. It's very, very similar to, imagine trying to create a game set in Japan, and the only thing you've ever heard about Japan is, like, World War II movies. Oh, you're not going to have a good time. It's going to be bad. Like, you creating and I'm not discouraging anybody from doing it, and I'm not saying it's also, like, something elite that, like, only the elite can do. I'm just saying, if you try to create a sandbox game, and you don't have this filing cabinet in the back of your head, a library even, of ideas, settings, characters, themes, choices, all that kind of shit you can just pull out and slap on the table. For you, like, trading card game players out there, it's like your fucking library, it's like your deck of cards that you got, and you're, like, pulling shit and putting it down. Like, you sit somebody down with, like, a Magic the Gathering deck. They don't fucking know what the fuck is this? Like, is that a skull? And it says to turn the card? Like, what? But you put someone who knows the game down with that, and they're like, oh yeah, this card. I bet you they also have that card in the deck to combo off of. Cool. Like, and you know how the deck works, as opposed to just having a bunch of pretty pictures and you can't quite string them together.
I feel like that's a really good example, because you can also just buy, like, the pre-made packs, or you could buy, like, a big thing of cards and then build your own deck, which I feel like is very semi-parallel to the idea of just, you've never played Magic before, just buy 300 cards and go at it. Or start with a pre-made deck and collect decks as you go and learn about how each color works, how each thing works, and then eventually you'll have your backlog, and you can make your own deck in a new and fun way.
There's no shame in starting for your first campaign with a pre-made campaign, a pre-made story. You're going to have more fun, your players are going to have more fun, because it's going to run pretty well. And that said, there's also no shame in just fucking winging it and having a good time, but I recommend for a first-time DM, at the very least, start in a universe you're familiar with. Like, run a game set in the town that you and your friends all live in present day. You all know where to go, you all know what to do, you all know the streets, these mean streets. Like, start it there. Everyone knows that. That could be a good place. So you wouldn't have to do a pre-made campaign necessarily, but because you and your players all know the town that you're using.
As somebody who started her first GM game very large and emergent, I suggest that severely. Run something before you try to give players free will. Or you'll regret it later.
So are we definitively saying for a sandbox game, like, don't do the old, I've been dreaming of this universe since I was 12, and I've always really wanted to run a game in it sort of thing? Are we, like, suggesting leave that for a more linear campaign?
No. I'm suggesting for a first-time DM, make sure the world you're playing is one that either you and your players know pretty well, so things flow more smoothly, or use a pre-developed campaign. If you've had an idea in your head for a universe, a setting with characters and factions and a plot in your head, you could try a sandbox game in there. If you're an experienced DM, I think that could work pretty well. If you're a new DM, you might get wrapped up in your own head and your own universe, and you're wanting to railroad that story through, that your players might not have fun. There's many different factors that would factor into this, but, like, I do think that if you're going to be a first-time DM, and you have this, like, universe in your brain that you've been crafting for years, maybe you would be better off doing something more linear with that, because your players don't know the crates of material you've been making on your fucking typewriter.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can agree with that. Like, the first game I ran was in my, like, own universe. It was just a fantasy universe. And it did have, like, I wouldn't say it was a completely emergent story game. Like, there were some elements of that, and that, like, I did the old, 4 different cities you can go to, sort of thing. Like, choose wherever you want to go. But again, that was still linear, as like the events that happened in those cities largely were the same. Maybe the events that happened in the cities after that would get changed by like what happened in the first city or so on. But for the most part, it wasn't like you show up in the city and like, what happens next? Let's find out. There was like, we're going to show up and you're going to do things sort of thing. So I don't know. I think you can go, I think don't dive totally in, right? Like do something sort of like I did where there is like a little bit of emergent storytelling, but there's still enough linear like backbone to keep things structured rather than just literally being like, all right, it's GTA, but I'm running a role-playing game. Like, let's go,
For a first-time game master, even if you choose a very linear module, like that is literally a dungeon crawl where there's no maze aspect to the dungeons, they're just going like room 1 leads to room 2, room 2 leads to room 3, etc., all the way back to room 50. If you ran that as your first game, you are still going to have emergent elements of story in that game because you cannot predict how how the players are going to interact with each other. There's going to be a story that comes out of like their banter with each other, whether or not the dwarf gets along with the elf, and whether or not they eventually earn a grudging respect for each other. Even in the most rigid story, there is going to be some elements of an emergent story within it that the game master is not going to have any control over, because the game master cannot have control over the things that come out the mouths of the players.
Unless all you do is retcon things, and then what's the fun in that?
Even if the game master retcons everything, even like the banter between the characters, that cannot be unsaid.
One of the things I was reading was talking about how players like have almost seemingly contradictory desires to both explore a narrative and also to create the narrative. And so you can kind of fulfill both of those by having, for instance, like modular scenes or plot points that you create that you can drop in at any point, kind of like Katie was talking about with his cities. You can have, they choose the city, but what happens within there, you've already got, little modules to drop in along the way to guide them.
I love that. I love modularity in design, any type. Just makes it a lot more efficient.
And then even if you feel like you're having things on the rails because you're just going from one module to the next, like you can still leave it up to the players to interpret the way that those pre-designed parts fit together. Like they'll have their own ideas about why they're on this certain track and what connection this NPC has to that NPC. And then like Lanina was saying earlier, you listen to that stuff for ideas along the way in order to create your narrative.
I love that. I really like that. That's a pretty succinct way of trying to say your design doesn't have to be so daunting because you've got these modules in your pocket, right?
Right.
Like you can, like, you're not going in there unprepared. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of like roguelike video games where you've got like the one I've played extensively is an old one. It's called NetHack. And you always go down to, like, there's always an oracle. And there's always, Jesus, it's been so long, the Wizard of Yandor. And they literally just ripped off some shit. There's the mines, I think they're called the Mines of Moria. I'm pretty damn certain. It's not a Lord of the Rings plot or anything. There's actually not much plot. But so everything's procedurally generated, right, in this video game. And in a sandbox game, it's kind of like that. You're generating things based on a set of input from your player and a series of, your own input, things you want in there. And you're just throwing shit out. But you can have these modules that are always there if the players choose to go to them, right? Like, they could, if they don't want to go to the pirate fucking island made out of lashed together ships tied to a fucking volcano, they don't have to. I don't know why they wouldn't want to go there. That's awesome. But if they don't go there, then they never encounter fucking Captain Squab. And if they don't encounter Captain Squab, they can't get their own ship. Mm-hmm. And maybe they choose to ride the giant tortoise that they fucking found at the last island, and they don't need a ship. Like, that's all cool. But you've got Captain Squab, and you've got the pirate island, all there, ready to fucking throw it out there like fucking parts of Exodia. Bringing it back with TCGs. Yu-Gi-Oh reference for you there.
What a nerd. I personally really like it when GMs grab things from other people and, like, at the end of the campaign, you go around like, yeah, you wouldn't have even had that had you not said that, like, 3 or 4 sessions ago. So it's your fault that you ended up, like, getting super screwed over because you gave me the idea to screw you over. Or something silly like that. And I think it shocks the players from, like, my experience, and it, like, excites them because they're like, oh, I helped with the story.
Yeah.
If there's 2 things I like to do, it's shock and excite my players.
Okay. Why did you look at me when you said that?
It's true. There's nothing weird about that.
So in a game,
Yeah. I'm talking about it in a game, guys.
I don't think that there is anyone who is harder on the players.
Oh my god.
You're a
And-
child!
I don't.
You're 12!
I'm sorry.
I
Go
don't-
to the bathroom now.
In a game, I don't think that there is anything more vicious to the players than the players themselves spitballing about what in the hell is going on in
Oh,
the
fuck
campaign.
yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
the players are giving the game master better ideas than what the game master thought of for how everything fits together. And sometimes it's way more logical than the things that the game master
You got a
put-
fucking
put
think
in.
tank. You're getting a free think tank out there for your ideas.
And that is emergent story. That is the strength of emergent story, is that all of that, you are using the think tank to create your story, and a smart game master will put it in there, and all of the players will be like, oh my god, I figured it out.
Yeah.
I put the pieces together, and I put together the game master's puzzle, when the game master was creating the puzzle based on what the players were saying.
So it's not like you created the puzzle, or it's not like you solved the puzzle, you created the puzzle.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's just amazing. I've always wanted to just be in a fully improvisational game to see what would happen. Like, no plans, nothing, just roll with the flow. I feel like it could have a lot of stops and starts. It's almost sandbox, but like not quite like free reign and everything. Like, you have a general idea of what you want out of the story, and your GM has like a general thought, but like, just go. Like, there's no
I too would like to
long-term
go with the punches. You're absolutely right.
Go with the flow, man.
You said roll.
You said roll with the flow, which was a fun one.
Oh. No. Go with the flow,
Punches.
roll with the punches? No.
I've seen Clayton run games before where his entire prep was like a piece of paper that said the PCs find a portal to Sigil. And that's the entire prep for the whole game.
One is pronounced sigil.
Thank
Is
you.
it?
You cheated
Are you
us!
serious?
You
I'm
cheated us!
sorry,
That was,
I'm
your disease, that
sorry.
was your idea for that game?
I'm sorry, how is it pronounced?
The city is called Sigil
Why?
because you are a dumb outsider.
It's like you specific. It's like bringing
No,
in
I get it. Thanks for letting me
It's
get
like bringing in
It's-
scabs to mining towns.
Why is the city?
Oh, okay,
yeah.
yes.
why
it
is the city in Kentucky called Versailles?
Or, any town in Ohio called literally anything.
For those of you who
Why
don't
is-
know, a lot of mining towns have names taken from, historical cities and places in Europe, as many cities in America do.
But they're pronounced wrong.
So that if scab miners were to come in during a union strike, they would be like, "Ah, yes, here I am in beautiful Versailles, Kentucky," and you're just like, "You ain't from around here, are you, boy?"
Or it's specifically to confuse out-of-state college students that are just trying to get directions.
Right, down here in Southern Ohio, we got Gallipolis.
No,
Gallipolis.
Gallipolis.
That's right. Not
Chillicothe.
Chillicothe.
Wait,
Chansey.
Should that be pronounced Chillicothe?
I'm sorry, how is Lancaster pronounced? Is it like that?
Lancaster.
Right.
It's Lancaster in Ohio.
Lancaster.
It's Lancaster.
You imagine somebody coming in and be like,
Pennsylvania.
"Oh yes,
you.
here I am to work your mines in Lancaster." Just fucking shoot him.
My
some
favorite
other
thoughts are like Kansas and Arkansas, because it's
Oh.
spelled the same.
Arkansas.
There's no noise in Illinois.
Bringing it back though, did you really only have the players take a portal to Sigil?
Yep.
And that was it?
That was it. Yeah.
Oh man,
That's beautiful.
that felt like a well-crafted story. Now I know the truth. You're a hack, Clayton. It reminds me of fucking Jordan's, what was it, 2 sentences in a doodle? Like, he came into some game with a ton of prep.
The factions game.
Oh yeah, and he was just like, turns out I should have had 2 sentences in a doodle.
But those are the best games, because it's just loose.
Was the faction game the best game, you think?
He shouldn't. He came fully prepared, and he sure wasn't. You think you're prepared, and then you realize that it would have been best to be unprepared. That's the only time I'll ever say that.
Well, to go back to the Sigil analogy, like, I, as a person, know the fictional city of Sigil better than I know pretty much any location in the real world. I am so heavily invested in the Planescape campaign or the campaign setting, that I can run it off the cuff, and my knowledge is that deep that I have an answer for every question that the players can conceivably have.
That's pretty cool.
That is really cool. I have that for Stars Hollow from Gilmore Girls. It's not as, applicable to any situation.
And that's one of the things that, if you're going to run a sandbox game, there has to be a shit ton of prep ahead of time. In a sandbox game, more than anything else, you really have to know you have to know the world before you get into it.
Yeah, it's just a different kind of prep.
Yes.
As opposed to prepping storyline, you're prepping the world.
Yeah. You're getting to know the world rather than you're creating the world.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes any sense.
Sounds like a level of familiarity I can't be at.
I'm sure there is some property, intellectual property, that you know better than pretty much anyone.
Fairy tale.
It's not. I only know Magnolia. I don't know much else. They've got different continents, they've got different countries and stuff like that.
What about, I guess you're not a big, world person.
Mm-mm.
Well, if you were to run that game, you would make sure that there was, no way that they could leave that area that you know very well. And it's...
I couldn't even give you all the answers of the place I live. Lived for 18 years of my life.
I'm like that too.
I have no direction sense, and I have no concept of large bodies of land.
Large tracts of land?
She had large
They wouldn't be body, it'd be
tracts of
tract.
land.
Tracts?
Monty Python.
TRACTS, a tract, a patch.
You're
thing,
attracted to
dangle,
land?
A dangle boy.
Well, who isn't attracted to land? Let me tell you. Woo!
Okay, not all of us are imperialist scum.
I just made a garden, and I was fucking rock hard the whole time. I'm very attracted to dirt, Kyle.
Just shoving it in there.
Hey, peppers and tomatoes. Gonna have a lot of those, everybody. Get ready for some salsa. That's gonna happen.
Anyway, so I have a hard time conceptualizing the concept of open world, because I hate even open world games.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't.
Well, it really isn't for everyone. There are some people who just, I see this more with, having seen players play in it. There are some players who they can't wrap their minds around it. There are some players who they get in there and they run amok. And then there are some players who they get there and they just sit in the corner and rock because they are so overwhelmed.
That would be me.
Well, it's me in real life. So
I think there's also...
I guess I'm going to invest in some more rocket chairs.
Sobbing. I think there's a weird line, too, because, it's infinitely... There's, for any sandbox, a video game or pen and paper, the quality of the sandbox depends on the quests and that are available, right? Mm-hmm. And pen and paper is almost infinitely ahead in that regard, in that as the GM, you're not limited in the same way video games are. So you can make whatever these quests are that you want to be engaging and have all these different things. For me, I struggle a little bit sometimes with sandbox video games, but I tend to enjoy sandbox pen and paper, which is kind of weird. I like Bethesda games, I enjoyed Skyrim, I played all the Fallouts, but then there's other things like Dragon Age Inquisition, for recently that came. Well, not that didn't come out recently. That came out in like
That was like 2 years ago.
2015 maybe. I don't know. Anyway, but the quests in that are pretty lackluster, despite the story being good. So, in that you don't want to feel like a grind. Is the core of my point, right? In any game, like if you're gonna approach a sandbox game in the same way you're approaching a sandbox video game, like I don't know if that's a good idea. I think you definitely need to draw that distinction line, because otherwise you're gonna end up having like maybe not go kill 4 crabs and come back sort of deal, but like you don't want to spread yourself too thin so that then players are able to like pierce the veil of your storytelling.
Mm-hmm. You have, in a sandbox game, you have to have things in the sandbox.
Tonka trucks, coming
Scorpions.
bringing it back around.
Scorpions and Tonka trucks.
You have to have something that the players are going to play with. And that's, like, when I first started trying to do this whole sandbox thing, it crashed and burned because I wasn't putting anything in the sandbox. It was like, okay, you guys are out in this big open world. And there wasn't anything there. We were all new to it, so the players hadn't had the experience of, well, hell, at the time, the current wave of indie games wasn't even on the horizon, where the players start driving the story, creating aspects of the story. This was back in the very late 90s, early 2000s, when those ways of thinking really hadn't come forward into tabletop role-playing games. So
you would have had like Daggerfall, and that would have been one of the big ones. Fun fact: the video game Daggerfall was that Elder Scrolls 2 has it's a good. This is really is tied in. It's a sandbox with no toys. The landmass in Daggerfall, if you were to get on a horse in the game and ride across the land, it is about the size of one of the islands in the UK, like little fucking kidney-shaped chain of islands. I forget which one, but it's very fucking large. It would take you like days and days and days of in-game time pushing down W, not the former president, but the keyboard key, and riding across the fucking land. And then you just pass through just blank shit, towns and bushes.
Would Baldur's Gate be considered a early sandbox game or not really? I guess that is kind of linear.
Baldur's Gate was
I would.
pretty linear.
Yeah.
So it was like, Planescape, Icewind Dale. Not important. What were you saying, Clayton?
I lost my point.
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Empty sandboxes.
Yeah,
Oh,
it was
empty
back in the
sandbox.
era
Billy,
before these games were around.
Put some toys in there. Treat yourself.
When I first started playing out these sandbox games, I was a new GM and my players were new to the game, so neither group had the experience of bringing things into the game. Like that, at the time, it wasn't a common conception that the players had the autonomy to bring elements into the game. At the time, the way the games were played was that the game master presented everything in the world and the players interacted with it.
Yeah, it would have never occurred to me at that time to even ask, like, can there be a trap in this corner? Can there be, not that you would ask that, but you know what I mean? Can I place some of my own things in this environment?
Right. And there wasn't like, in some games like Fate Points or Bennies or anything like that you could spend a resource in the game to create those elements in the game.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little weird to think about a purely linear game for us to play right now.
Only forward.
Oh yeah, like everything is crafted by the GM. Yes, there is always going to be emergence because of the fact that you have multiple humans around a table, but like having a purely, strictly linear game, when's the last time we've done one of those? Whenever
we did the Tomb of Horrors.
Oh, that's true. So that was a section in a
bigger campaign.
Bigger campaign. It is an old school way of thinking.
Yeah, I've never run a whole campaign that was all one story, like the one linear story. Even the first game I can think of running, where We had like 10 players or something like that. Oh, God. Even that had where they got to the end of the campaign, they found out who the big bad guy was. I let them determine how they were going to attack this guy because they were this was a Planescape game. They were in a metropolis. They had all of these other resources. So basically the players then on their own decided we're going to ally ourselves with all of these other NPCs that we've met along the way who we've convinced to be on our side. And I let them go into this big fight with this the big bad evil guy of the campaign. And even though I had planned on the party being 10 people big and made his forces strong enough to account for that, they ended up bringing like basically twice that number to the fight, and they just mopped the floor with him. And because, I mean, that was one of my very early experiences with the emergent story and allowing the players to set the course for what happened next. That's where I first let go of the reins and let them basically be as creative with the solution as they could and let them be badass at it as well.
Have we talked much about how to be a good player in an emergent game?
Not at all.
Might it be time to switch gears? We're tooling around in fourth. We're on that open highway, like a Tom Petty song. We're going to switch on down, kick it into high gear.
Looks like
talk about being players. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, you've got a mullet when you're on a motorcycle and a Tom Petty song is playing. You got a mullet. Absolutely, you're right.
All right.
So in a sandbox game, the players have to be so invested in it in order for it to work. If they aren't invested, then it's going to be boring and nothing is going to happen because they don't care.
Or because they don't care, or they just don't know what to do. Like, they're just kind of there. Analysis paralysis kicks in. They're like, I don't know this world. What do they do? I would not consider the Eclipse Phase game I ran a sandbox game. But there was a lot of shit that I just left up to you guys and winged on the fly. Wang was the and I wanged on the winged on the fly. And there was actually quite a bit of emergence. Did it feel like a sandbox game? Did it feel like a linear game? I'm curious. We never really had a postmortem for that.
Felt linear to me.
Yeah, it did feel linear, but you allowed us to make, like, especially at the end, I feel like you allowed us to make the big decisions that determined how things were going to turn out.
It didn't feel linear for me.
It really... I'm kind of glad that it felt linear, because it kind of wasn't. I had a lot of modules designed out, but you guys could have kind of gone any way you wanted to with it. And this ties into what you're saying, Clayton, because I did feel like there was a bit of... As players, you guys were like, I don't know what to do, kind of.
Yeah, there was... I think that was a function of the setting more than anything. Is like, it's this far future, and like, this is a post-scarcity economy. We can do and get anything.
Death is meaningless.
Too much. Yeah, everything is meaningless, and that was the focus of my character.
Yeah. That was something that Jordan as a player felt as well, that nothing you guys would do would matter. And so I had to switch gears, and I had to pick the modules to give to you guys and kind of set you on a path. That's why the security forces showed up. They didn't have to show up at all, but they ended up being a huge part of the endgame, because you guys were sort of doing a mission for them, so to speak. And I just kind of had them show up, because I could tell people were like, I don't know what to do. And like going to that derelict ship, that was just a module. You guys could have picked something else.
I think the biggest problem with Eclipse Phase was that we didn't know what was possible. We got to points where we could determine what we were going to do next, and we didn't know what we could do next. We didn't know what the possibilities of what was going to happen next could be.
I think it felt like a linear game in like a sea of words, like a line in a book, in a way, of where there are so many more chapters. But like, do we just start at one? Do we have to go through the index to find where to go next? Not to mention that dictionary of terms in the back.
Yeah.
In reality. I don't know. It was, I think if we had all known the world a little bit better, it may have worked out. Because it was like a futuristic sci-fi world, so like a lot of things were possible that we couldn't really conceptualize at first. The idea of even morphs and how many different types of morphs there were was even like outside of our current knowledge and thinking.
Interesting.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, the biggest problem with that was not that the game, like, you as the game master knew the world really well. You knew what was possible. I don't feel like us as players knew the world well enough to know what we could do.
I think it felt less linear for me because I found a part of the Eclipse Phase setting that I wanted to know so much more about. So, like, I went up to you and was just like, can I do this in the game? Can I do this? Can I do this? Can my character do this? Can this be my character arc? I was just really, really excited about Futures.
Interesting. I didn't expect this episode to kind of make that click. I guess it really ended up being a bit of an example of what not to do in a sandbox game. Like you were talking about, KD, with I have this universe I've been making since I was 12. And I'm going to introduce that to my players as a sandbox-type game. Your players don't know the universe. I had read a shit ton of that guide, cut out a bunch of stuff, added a few more things of my own, and I was like, okay, guys, here's the Eclipse Phase universe. You have a ship. What do you do?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, gonna just, sleep.
Does the ship have a Wi-Fi?
What's around the ship?
Interesting. Well, maybe that... I don't know. I could talk more about that. I'm not sure if we want to do that in this episode or not. But I think that it does trace right back into some things we've already said about, like, things to avoid, pitfalls of making an emergent sandbox game.
Another pitfall that I want to talk about is that, like, more than any other types of game, this game can get bogged down in minutia. Sessions will pass where the most mundane things are going on, and they have nothing to do with any sort of plot whatsoever. Because if you don't have a direction to go, you're going to be aimless. You're going to fixate on the little things that you know, and you're not going to be able to really branch out, and you don't know where you can go, so you kind of insulate yourself with what you do know.
I think that's also just the danger with running sandbox games that sort of end up becoming like life simulators, you know, where unless the whole point of the game and everyone's on board with it is like, all right, folks, we're going to open a shop and we're going to this entire game is going to investigate like fucking commerce. Like, we're going to go about trade routes. We're going to make a lot of money, and it's going to be like Spice and Wolf. We're just going to do it.
Okay, Svensson, do I need to get wooden shelves or metal shelves? We're going to be selling some potions, and if one of them spills on the wood shelf, it could melt through the wood. It could eat the wood, or at least stain the varnish. But the metal shelf, they're more expensive, they're heavier. Is the floor of this... It's an old building. Maybe it wouldn't support the metal shelving. Can you imagine?
Now I can.
Yeah. You brought it to life. But, like, unless everyone's on board for that, you know, I feel like you're right. So, like, sandbox games can get bogged down into this, like, just kind of weird life simulator where even if there is, maybe not even to that extent necessarily, but kind of, where, like, maybe, you know, your character's dating someone, or your character's, like, got a weird hobby they want to do, or your character's like, well, I really do want to start a side business where I, like, sell these things or something, you know? And then all of a sudden you're investing all this time during the campaign in that. And, like, you start to lose track of even player-developed plot, you know? Like, or plot that you're trying to introduce. So, and then Sandbox is good for that, but
you shouldn't get bogged down with it. Like, if your player wants to open a shop in a sandbox game and have a side business making some money, let them. Mm-hmm. In the Eclipse Phase game, Beth was able to literally design a Channing Tatum morph and sell it for some resources. But I didn't cause Beth's business to be the focus of a session, where all we did was talk, okay, so now are we going to do Channing Tatum at age 28? or age 32. There was a slight difference that the hairline was slightly farther back. He, however, had put on more muscle mass. Like, I don't give a shit about Channing Tatum. Don't bog yourself down with the things your players latch onto. But if your players latch onto something, like, I'd like to make a shop. Let him do that. Let him do that in your emergent game. That's how you get people motivated.
We
I had
would
a hard
like to
time.
throw a wedding in an apocalypse.
Get that
Yeah.
sick, what's it called back?
Psyche.
Psyche points. I had a hard time getting people in the Eclipse Phase game motivated about anything, even though I thought I had picked things you were all interested in. Nina, you picked the Futura project, but I had a little subplot for every single one of you, and I was like, man, why aren't they biting? Like, you know, I'm casting out the fucking bait. The bobber's there. Why aren't the fish biting? I look at you all as fish. And fish feel no pain, I might remind you.
Uh-oh.
But I think that I realized the problem there. You were all standing in a room, and I was above you on some catwalks, and I had big buckets of fruit. And I was dumping fruit on all of you. There was a fucking storm of fruit throwing down, and it was all apples. It was a ton of apples.
That's gotta hurt.
And all of a sudden, I would I'd keep dumping, and then I would grab a banana, and I'd throw a banana, and I'd wing you in the head with it, and be like, hey, take the bait! Here's a banana! Follow the banana! But all you guys thought is just, well, it's a bunch of fruit coming at us, I'm not sure what to do. I'm not sure what to eat.
Like, that one's slightly different.
Right,
but it's
and
still
in my
fruit.
mind, I'm like, it's a fucking banana! Eat the banana, you monkey! But, but in reality,
Come here, fish.
it was just a sea of fruit. Just a,
Kaya just thinks all his friends are animals, like...
and I'm the zookeeper!
But,
Does that make sense, though? Like, I
yeah.
thought that this is a different thing. Like, surely they'll take this cue. No one took the cue because there were too many fruits being thrown.
Throw less fruit.
Yeah.
yeah, moral of the story here,
Just throw less fruit.
throw less fruit.
Or have your fruit on shelves so people can pick them
But metal shelves are wooden shelves, Nina.
out. Shoot, you're right.
It wasn't a function of the story why I lost interest. It was a function of the amount of time that passed between sessions.
That was a big problem, too.
I-
We had
I-
2 month-long
Yeah,
hiatuses.
I completely lost connection with my character. I didn't understand what motivated my character anymore, and that's why I put my head down and just charged forward toward what I perceived to be the end of the game.
That makes sense. I can't say that I wasn't bummed, and I can't say that I, am, fully over it, because, I was very excited about that game, and it was no one's fault that we went on 2 separate month-long hiati, during the game of 3 to 4 week breaks. We played some one-shots, we skipped some weeks entirely, and it killed it, and it bummed me out. But I do understand now more, how people felt, and your motivation for just being like, Kyle, I just want to finish the game. I don't care about my side story. That makes sense. That really does. I was just putting on a character personality. I don't look at you guys as fish and monkeys. I wasn't being serious there. I don't know if you knew.
But people are apes.
Well, we had a common
People
ancestor.
are animals.
So do we want to start talking about geek things, or do we have anything else we want to talk about?
Have we squeezed this fucking orange enough? Have we gotten all
What
this?
is it with eating fruit?
He's a smoothie boy now.
We've been squeezing it for an hour and 15 minutes.
Have we really? God, I guess we'll have to
I
stop.
don't like the idea of squeezing it for that long.
I love this topic.
It's starting to get spongy and bruised at this point.
What the fuck? Ow! The mind is willing, but the flesh is spongy.
Okay, geek things. Here we go.
All right, I guess we'll stop. I liked this topic so much. Maybe we'll come back to it someday with different analyses.
Well, we didn't-
I'm sure you'll bring up your thesis again, don't worry.
We didn't talk about how to build the campaign. We could always come up with how to make an emergent plot versus a sand plot.
I feel like
Sandbox
that's
plot.
almost a separate podcast, though.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying right now.
Well,
that is a
listeners, you tell us. If you want to hear more about this, if you have some more questions, please send us an email. alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com.
Way to go. Or on Discord.
Or just
hop on that
send-
Discord. Send us what do they call send us a twiddle?
DM.
A live a dungeon master?
Oh, Bean.
Send us a Dungeon Master.
Send us your dungeon
Yeah,
master.
DM me your dicks, I guess.
No.
Well, you can find me on Instagram @FoxCarrick.
Can you check your Instagram?
I do. Instagram is one of the few social mids that I prescribe to.
Guys, you heard it here first. Just DM Kyle pictures of your dick. Just do it.
Once again, that's at Fox Carrick. at
mhm.
On
Instagram.
Okay, geek stuff. So, a couple things. One, it was recently the end of a university cycle here in town, and it was move out. And a bunch of fucking assholes just, they throw out perfectly good things. Over the years, I have found such wonders in the garbage. Great shit. I found the Wii. I've found an Xbox. I have found a bunch of very nice kitchenware.
I got them.
I found a full Gundam, like seriously, like a foot-tall Gundam model. Complete. Bunch of weird shit, like a Chinese-English translator. Anyway, this year, a hammer. A big hammer?
Yeah,
Did I find a
remember?
big hammer?
No, not you. A friend did. By the dumpster. It was like a full-size
The Donkey
Donkey Kong
Kong
hammer.
Oh,
That's
dang,
exciting.
Yeah.
Clayton found like a full size like female dress form.
What?
That's, yeah, like brand new practically.
You guys kept that, right?
Yeah, we
I
kept
have
it.
it.
Cool. That's awesome.
I've also certainly
fuck?
found things in dumpsters.
Like, so-
This wasn't in the dumpster.
It
This
was-
was standing next to the dumpster because they didn't want to soil it by putting it in the dumpster.
Mhm.
So
Why wouldn't you sell that? You can get good money for that.
That's what I thought.
It
but-
doesn't make any sense to me. Like, it's a unique situation in this town because there are students. Some of them are foreign exchange students, and they're just leaving the country. Others are going back home to work at fucking Blockbuster? No.
There's only one Blockbuster left, and it is in Alaska.
Well, maybe they're going back to Alaska to work at their local Blockbuster for summer, make some spending cash.
A lot of them, their parents pay for everything, and so it's just kind of like
They have no concept of how
who.
much.
So it's just kind of like, who cares? I'll buy one next time.
They
or
throw
whatever.
away so much food.
Yeah, with
Yeah.
lots and lots. I've seen people. It's very common. Just take their pantry and fridge, scoop it into a fucking a trash bag, and throw the dumpster.
Yeah.
But what really pisses me off is clothes. And not like gross, dirty clothes, like literally bags and bags of clean, modernly styled, like maybe it doesn't fit you anymore, maybe you don't want it anymore, just tons of clothing and coats, fucking very nice coats. Please, if you're thinking of throwing shit out, find in your town, there's always one, find a thrift shop to donate it to. Find some kind of like food pantry if it's not expired food, or
Homeless shelters.
or homeless shelters. Donate your shit.
They have boxes for that in specific locations that you can just put your stuff into. You don't have to deal with people. They're boxes in certain parking lots.
If you don't donate your shit, I'm gonna go dig it out of the trash and donate it myself. And do you want me thumbing through your stuff? Me.
You really don't.
So donate, or else I'll come to your dumpster. I will come to your fucking former place of residence.
I'll make
your
I'll
current
make
one. I
fun
don't
of
know where
that
you live.
term paper that you threw out.
yeah. I found the turntable this year. Fucking spinning some wax on my new turntable that I'm actually gonna sell because I don't have two. I don't need two
DJ
turntables.
Trashman.
DJ Trashman.
Hey.
Anyway, that's my rant.
Have any geek things? Kyle? Do you have any geek
I'll
things?
talk more. I got one. It's a strange geek thing. For those of you out there who might be feeling the depression, feeling bad, there's an over-the-counter vitamin. And a disclaimer: by no means am I a doctor, but there is a vitamin you can grab at any place where you buy vitamins. You can just buy it over the counter. It's called SAME, SAM-E, letter E. I don't necessarily want to go on medication. I don't want to talk about that right now. But I will say that, I started out with 200 milligrams of this stuff once a day. Didn't quite feel much of a change. 400 milligrams, and I'm the person speaking to you now. A happy man. A strange happy man. I don't know. Try it out. It's also good for bad joints. You got bad knees. You got bad knees and hips. Take some SAMe. It's a wonder. Wonder drug. It's great.
But if you take absolutely any other prescription or over-the-counter drugs, please ask your doctor or the pharmacist first before you add this to it.
Oh yeah.
Especially
Oh
since
yeah.
I'm
No,
pretty
in no way
sure
am I a
You have-
doctor.
You could have
In
some horrible
no way.
interactions.
Especially since I'm pretty sure SAMe does affect the way mood stabilizers and antidepressants work, if you're wondering.
Well, there you go. Don't listen to anything I say.
Just look it up.
Do your research.
Yeah, do your research. It's an
Talk to your
option.
doctor.
If for some reason
Fun fact that I learned through another podcast of mine that I've been religiously binging. I found out where Salisbury steaks come from. Did you know that Salzburg? No. There was a man named Dr. Salisbury that created the first fad diet. And his fad diet was indeed ground beef and hot water. And it was supposed to cleanse you.
Oh, the fucking British diet.
and he found and then like he found the perfect way to get it all cooked and taste good and the healthiest way to do it to purify your body.
Cleanses you.
This man hated vegetables. He thought they were bad for you.
He just took a steak and he boiled it. He just boiled some ground meat.
Mr. Dr. Salisbury, I love you.
And then he hated starches and vegetables. He thought the hot water would cleanse you of all of the leftover vegetable remnants. And the way he prepared this ground beef, he said it was the best way. It was with the onions and boiled and et cetera, et cetera. I don't actually know how Salisbury, I don't like it. It's not like the best thing in the world. And the fact that Salisbury steak is still around today and that people still kind of follow fad diets.
Was this like late 1800s? Like when was this?
1900s. Early mid-1900s, if I remember properly. And this Dr. Salisbury today would probably have a heart attack because his beautiful Salisbury steak is served with, potatoes, a full starch, gravy, all of the things that he vehemently opposed. Huh. And I thought that was...
He is a hero. And this man sounds great.
Well, I didn't realize this was a health podcast. It's some actual nerd news. As of this recording, Paradox Con's going on. Paradox Interactive, a really cool company that makes cool map simulator games with a very questionable DLC policy. Unfortunate. But you guys should check out some of the stuff that's coming out of there, even if when this is released, like...
Next week.
Yeah, everything will be... out by then. It's
what
coming
Paradox
out.
games do you play, Kyle?
I play all of them.
What are your favorites, Kyle?
I'm on a bit of a Europa Universalis 4 kick right now.
But which one have you put like 10,000 hours into, Kyle?
Probably I'm being poked. Help, someone.
Say it.
Crusader Kings 2.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you like medieval history.
Fucking marriage simulator. I love Crusader Kings.
It probably isn't still the case, but last week it was free to download for anyone. Crusader Kings 2.
What?
I got Crusader Kings 2 last week for free.
I didn't know about this.
You can always play it on my account.
Damn. I mean, I like Stellaris. It's a good one. I play it in kind of binge spurts, if you will.
Why?
But I'm currently off the binge. But Crusader Kings, man, yeah, it's check it out. It's complex, very complex. A lot of learning curve, I think, but
Not as bad as like some of the other ones, but it's fun. So
It's more of those games that I don't really have the ability to play.
We're not
types
gonna
of
talk
games
about
with
that
really
geography.
emergent story.
yeah, actually, good. Bring it
Different
back
every
around.
time you play.
Bringing it back around.
anyway, that's all I got.
I
Paradox.
have a few. There are some videos that have been circulating around of MRIs taken of people who are speaking and singing. First one I saw was of a man speaking German. Then there was another one of
German, you say?
of a male opera singer performing Wagner, and then a woman performing Mozart, and you can just see every muscle within their head moving as they are performing, and just the way that the human tongue moves in order to form all of the syllables that we are creating is absolutely amazing.
So, Mozart confirmed for top music.
Questionable at best. I'd
Better than
like
Bach.
to see a comparison of languages, particularly German versus English, because German uses a couple of different muscles when they say different the noises that we don't have in English, and I think that'd be really interesting to watch. But I don't like looking at human bodies doing things. In the medical sense, it's really grosses me out.
I think it's an art, and it is amazing. I found it just, God, the fact that we exist on a consistent basis is so artistic in itself, and how we have every chance to allow all of our genes to fuck up at the same time, and yet here we are still prospering.
Another geek thing is, I haven't heard any further updates, but as of 2 weeks ago, FX is developing a series based on the movie What We Do in Shadows.
Oh, no way!
Yeah.
Amazon Prime has a whole slew of fantasy B movies that are awesomely bad.
Wait. Fantasy Bees?
fantasy,
Like Jupiter ascending.
B-grade movies that are very strongly fantasy.
I understood that, like, when I thought about it a little longer, but when you said fantasy bee movies, I'm just like, it's about bees in the fantasy world.
Fantasy bees.
And I'm all here for fantasy bees.
And I've been watching a lot of Amazon Prime lately. Watch Comrade Detective. It is a satire of 80s buddy cop movies and TV series. It's written as basically a cop movie slash propaganda, and the voices that are dubbed over, the main two characters are dubbed over by Channing Tatum and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I thought it was absolutely hilarious.
I'll check that out. That sounds pretty cool, actually.
That's everything I've got.
I don't got nothing.
All right.
If you're a fan of Digital Combat Simulator, the F-14 module's about to drop, and I could not be more danger zoned right now.
Would you say you're taking the highway?
Yeah.
To the
Danger zone!
Oh, okay.
All right, guys. What do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice? This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.